Hello, welcome back to Social Channel 591. Today I'll be reading Dragon Tongue. Rise of the Dragon Riders, Book 1 by Ava Richardson. Chapter 1. The flames of the forge rolled together in their usual dance, mixing hues of marigold, apricot, orchard, and cardinal as they twisted and billowed above the bed of glowing embers. Cora's heart had always looked upon the blaze with respect and awe that never ceased after seeing countless pieces of metal bend to its will. But tonight, as the smoke from the flames filled both the small room and her papa's lungs, it wasn't respect bubbling in Cora's guts. It was worry. She tried not to let it consume her as she moved about the forge, carrying out her daily duties, but worry, like a splinter, grew more troublesome the longer it lingered. Every cough that erupted from her father's lips sounded raspier than the last, and the accompanying wheezing made each inhale and exhale seem like a chore. Papa should be in bed, resting, not spending every possible hour in the forge. But Varenhart was as stubborn as the metals he devoted his life to. It would take more than a cough to make him yield. Sighing, Cora replenished the bin of charcoal next to the hearth, refilled the basin of sand used to crunch molten metal, and made sure the necessary tongs and stakes were ready and within her father's reach. If it were as easy to pound some sense into his hand, she grumbled as she watched Varen work, her voice barely carrying over the crackling flame and the rhythmic pinging of Papa's hammer against a piece of steel. What was that? Varen looked up from the sword he was making and eyed his daughter. Despite his health, it appeared his hearing was as sharp as ever. Nothing, Cora responded quickly, swiping a strand of brown hair off her sweaty neck. Just doing my chores. Oh, but I know that face, little lark, and I can tell that something is troubling you. Varen smiled, setting his tools down on the anvil. You can talk to me about it if you like. Cora softened a little at his smile. The use of the pen name he'd given her as a child. But she knew that sharing her concerns likely wouldn't do any good. They'd had a conversation before, and it had always ended the same way. Still, she had to try. Papa, I'm 17 now. I know what to do more than the stock in the forge, and hand you tools. I think it's time you let me help you with the orders. You've been unwell, and you've been getting older. I really think Varen held up his hand. Did you just call me an old man? The crinkles around his eyes deepened as he laughed. I'm not sure. I'm not so decrepit as you think, Corehart. I am well enough. And as if to prove his point, he lifted his hammer again and began to pummel the steel in strong practice strokes. Cora watched him, unamused. He was always making light of things when it came to his troubles, never wanting to burden her by admitting it when something was actually wrong. But Cora wasn't a child anymore, and she noticed the way his shoulders seemed to bend inward more and more. Each day, the way the lines were created, his forehead deepened when he thought she wasn't looking. And the coughing, a lingering side effect from a bad chest infection a few months ago, didn't seem to be getting away. No doubt exacerbated by the smoke from the forge. Papa, she tried again. All I'm saying is you don't have to do it all by yourself. Let me help you. Varen swung his hammer twice before responding. I can manage, Lark. You just keep the charcoal and the sand coming, yeah? Cora pressed her lips together. Stubborn old man. Varen had always been a hard worker, spending long hours in the forge, filling orders for customers. When Cora's mother had passed away 6 years ago, the amount of work he'd done had bordered on compulsive, with the forge becoming a place to escape his grief. But when he got sick a few months back, Varen hadn't been able to work, and an order of weaponry, tools, and other supplies for the soldiers stationed at the garrison hadn't been completed by the agreed-upon delivery date. Varen had been fined for the late delivery, and ever since, he'd spent every waking hour trying to finally finish up the order and somehow make up for the ever-expanding pool of debt he and Cora found themselves swimming in. He's going to work himself to the grave next to Mama, Cora frowned, moving to stroke the flames of the fire. But as she picked up the poker, a familiar rattling sound from the air, and she whirled around. Varen was bent over an anvil, his entire body shaking as his lungs revolted against the smoke, sputtering and wheezing. This wasn't one of his sporadic coughs, but one of the more serious episodes where he couldn't catch his breath, his lungs puckering against the smoke. Sorry guys, I need something to drink. And I've been writing all day. Okay. Let's go back into this. Papa! Cora tossed the poker and ran to her father. Varen dropped to his hammer and gasped for air. As the coughing fit worsened, His face began to turn crimson, and Cora's heart leapt in her throat as his knees gave way. With her breath catching, Cora began to pound on her father's back with her palm, desperately trying to clear whatever gunk was blocking his airway. "It's okay," she said, trying to sound calmer than she felt. "It's going to pass. Just try to breathe." Van let out several more hacking coughs before finally gasping, his lungs filling with much-needed air. The rattling wheeze that followed each breath made her own shoulders tighten further with worry. Okay, a few seconds had passed, but it felt much longer. Tears pricked Cora's eyes as she helped him over the wooden stool in the corner. That wasn't the first time a coughing fit had nearly caused Varen to pass out, and each time it happened, Cora was terrified. He would stand up, breathing for good. Cora was terrified he would stop breathing for good. So far, they'd been lucky, but she knew better than to count on luck. "Here," she said, handing him a glass of water from the shelf near the door. "Drink this." Thank you. Van breathed, his voice hoarse from his episode. He took a small sip of from the cup, then another. That one nearly got me. "It's the smoke," Cora answered, waving a hand in the air. "It's not good for you. This is why you need to let me help. You've been sick for months, and you're not getting any better. It's because you spend all your time in here. Your lungs can't heal. My lungs are..." The rest of Van's sentence was swallowed by a loud shout outside the forge. Soon there were other voices too, calling out to each other. Cora couldn't make out the specifics of what they were saying. She could tell it was something more than friendly solutions between neighbors. "Something's wrong." Varen rasped around, already pushing himself on unsteady feet. What do you think it can be?" Cora grabbed his arm, lending her support, and together they hurried over the door. "A plague? Some kind of attack? I don't know, but I don't think whatever it is will be good news." Wiping all, still shaking his hand on the front of her work apron, Cora lifted the latch that held the door of the forge shut. Outside the small village of Barcroft was a flurry of activity. People were scurrying up the dusty path that led to the town center. Now that she was outside, Cora became aware of a strange, keening noise rendering the air. Sarah Bishop, the seamstress, scurried by them, her blonde braid swishing from side to side. In the wind, Sarah, Varen called out to her, pulling his arm away from Cora. "Sarah, wait." Spinning so fast her skirt nearly tangled around her legs, Sarah let out a breath. "Oh, Varen, have you heard?" "No, what happened?" We've been in the fort since dawn. What's happened? It's awful, Sarah replied, pressing a hand to her chest. There's been a death. By stars. Van rubbed a palm down his face. Who? Sarah shook her head. I'm not sure exactly, but I heard it was one of the scout scavengers. Cora's eyebrows lifted, and she couldn't help interrupting to ask, was it a dragon attack? I don't know, Sarah admitted. But I believe the body is being taken to the square. We should head there now and see what we can do to help, Van said. Sarah gave a nod of agreement, and the two turned back and began to head toward the center of the town, nearly shoulder to shoulder. Cora followed awkwardly behind them. Deaths in Barcroft were always serious, somber affairs, given to the township's remote location in the Themla Mountains. The population was small, and everyone knew everyone else. A death here was felt by all. Yet as Cora shuffled after her father, a feeling of disconnect tugged at her senses. Aside from her papa, there wasn't a single person in the village Cora felt a real kinship with. The older she got, the more it seemed as if she was an outlander in the village. The deaths of her mother and grandmother, Nan and Livy, hadn't helped, as Cora's defense mechanism of grief was withdrawal. She had a few acquaintances growing up, but never more than that. When she left the schoolhouse and entered the forge, she hadn't missed them, and although she was happy during the time spent working alongside her father, there was a keen sense of loneliness that never really seemed to go away. Even in times like this, when the tragedy seemingly brought everyone together, Cora still saw herself on the outskirts, part of it, but not part of it at all. It was a strange feeling, and it must be the loneliness that much more tangible. The path leading into the center of the village filled with people, and more citizens ventured out of their homes and shops. As Cora stepped into the crowded square, the sound from earlier, the strange keening sound, grew in volume. Cora pressed up into her tiptoes, trying to see around the mass of bodies. And as she did so, she caught a glimpse of the source of the sound. It was a girl with thick red hair, kneeling on the ground and wailing next to the body of a young man with the same fairy locks. Cora recognized them as the Barrett twins. They'd been to school together as children, but they'd always kept to themselves, seemingly content enough with each other, not to bother with making friends, as they'd all grown older and taken up to their trades. Cora hadn't thought much about the twins until now. "It's Nico Barrett," she whispered to Varen, who stiffly beside her. "That's his sister, Cora," beside him. "That's his sister Claire," beside him. The young woman's sobs filled the square as the rest of the village looked on. Expressions of sympathy echoed into the lines of their faces. What happened to the boy?" Varen asked those around him. "It was Brigg, the tanner," who responded. "Word is he fell from the cliff. There was a catch of scales he was trying to get to, and he lost grip. Died on impact." Cora winced, imagining the terror Nico must have felt as he plummeted to his death. She spent a lot of time in the mountains herself and knew well the dangers they posed. One misstep could mean losing your life, just as Nico had lost his. It was a tragic accident. Glancing upwards, Cora scanned the skies. Clara's wailing bells were so loud she imagined even the dragons who hid in the deepest parts of the wilderness could hear them. She pictured them flying overhead, their curiosity getting the better of them. But there was no sign of the dragons. Occasionally they did fly over the village, but it was rare, and Cora had never seen one up close. No one had except the scavengers, and they went out of their way to avoid the creatures as much as possible. Dragon scales was important, necessary, but the dragons themselves were another story. As Clara continued to weep over the body of her brother, several of the villagers stepped forward to offer their condolences. The rest of the scale scavengers stood close by, grief swimming in their eyes. Several of them carried satchels across their bodies, meant for carrying the scavenged scales of the dragons. Cora could just make out the shape of an iridescent lemon-colored scale sticking out of the top of one of the bags. Such a small scale, such a small thing, no bigger than the size of Papa's hand, yet incredibly valuable. Even if they were terrifically dangerous to retrieve, Nico's death proved that. Cora eyed the troop of scavengers. She recognized them, of course, but she couldn't recall their names. She'd seen them regularly enough, to know they were a tight group, and the death of one of their own would no doubt be felt keenly by more than just Clara. She envied them a little for that, for the bond between them. Nico's death was an awful tragedy, but they still had each other. There was probably some comfort in that, at least. "Make way!" A loud, gruff voice called out over the sympathetic murmuring of the crowd. "Let us pass." The words were like a bucket of cold water to a flame, dousing the warm sympathy and unity in the square and covering all those gathered within it in a palpable wave of tension. "Oh, great!" Cora groaned, recognizing the voice. They all did. "The Malhoes are here." Malhoes is the name given to those whose family lines were not native to Tenagard, but to Athalia. Athalia, King Onyx's homeland. It was said that Onyx have grown tired of fighting a civil war for power within his own country, decided to head south to Tenagard, a land that was stricken by famine. Onyx, a man with strange and powerful magical abilities, including an exceptionally long lifespan, saved the land and its people. The generate, however, as with everything, aid from Onyx the Deathless, or so he began to be called, came with a price. He crowned himself king of Tenagard and opened its borders to the Malhoes, a people who cared little for the granite ways of life and deeply resented the less than warm welcome they received. It had all happened long ago, before even Nana Livy was born. But the Garrettes resented and disliked the Malhoes. Dislike for the Malhoes remained. Tension between the two groups had slightly eased over the years, but trust was something that was earned, in Cora's opinion. The Malhoes and their selfish nature couldn't be trusted. "Mind your own tongue, girl," Thorn hissed, elbowing her in the side, "lest you draw attention to yourself." Cora didn't say another word, but as a tall, sneering man with narrow eyes and thick black cloak around his shoulders pushed through the crowd, flanked by two soldiers from the garrison, heat rushed through her body, and she automatically clenched her fists. Captain Daggett strode forward, one hand resting on the blade of his waist, the other stroking the thin line of hair and trace of his jawline. "What is this?" he demanded. And that's it for chapter 1. Stay tuned, please, for another great chapter of Dragon Town. Woo-hoo!